Human history has recorded very few figures who experienced the war between body and soul as intensely as Baldwin IV in the late 12th century. Amidst the dusty and bloody landscape of Jerusalem, one man witnessed the collapse of both his kingdom and his own cells. He was the masked king of Jerusalem, a monarch who held a sword with one hand, while trying to hide his decaying flesh with the other, feeling the breath of death on his neck every passing second. It all began with an innocent childhood game under the golden sun of Jerusalem. Young Baldwin was testing his endurance with friends in the palace gardens by pricking each other's arms with needles. While the other children flinched in pain, there was not the slightest movement on Baldwin's face. His arm was bleeding, yet he felt nothing. When the historian William of Tyre noticed this, the fate of the kingdom was sealed in that moment. This was not a display of courage. It was the first claw of leprosy, a disease that kills the nerve endings. In the medieval world, leprosy was seen as a curse from God, the mark of a living corpse. Yet Baldwin was the son of a king. When his father died, he was only 13 years old, and the burden placed on his shoulders was far heavier than his decaying body. His people looked upon him with suspicion. How could a child, and a sick one at that, defend the holy city against Saladin, the brightest star of the Islamic world? Baldwin never allowed his illness to imprison him in a room. Even as his right hand became paralyzed and withered into a claw, he never stopped writing. He practiced for hours, holding the reins with his left hand or sometimes even with his teeth. In the year 1177, fate wove its web on the hills of Montgisard. Saladin was advancing toward Jerusalem with a massive army. Facing him was young Baldwin with only a few hundred knights. The 16-year-old king, with his pain-ridden body, dismounted from his horse and knelt before the true cross to pray in front of his army. That day, Baldwin defeated Saladin and changed the course of history. However, his victory would not last. The disease progressed, his fingers fell away, and he eventually lost his sight. Yet, he managed to hold his kingdom together until his very last breath. When Baldwin died, he was only 24 years old, but the legacy he left behind was proof that an iron will is far stronger than flesh and bone. While the echoes of victory were celebrated in the streets of Jerusalem, another war was brewing in the dark corridors of the palace. As Baldwin's body wasted away day by day, the future of the kingdom became a plaything for ambitious nobles. Leprosy was gnawing not just at the king's fingers, but at the unity of the state. The reality that the king could never father a child fueled the struggles for the throne. His sister Sibylla's marriage had now become a matter of Jerusalem's survival. Guy de Lusignan, arriving from France, was a handsome and ambitious knight. When he married Sibylla, he believed he would seize the reins of the kingdom. However, despite his failing sight, Baldwin could sense the weakness and arrogance within Guy. The king could smell the scent of betrayal in the palace. On one side were provocative barons like Guy and Raynald de Chatillon, trying to collapse the kingdom from within. On the other stood the shadow of Saladin, waiting at the border. The king's condition had reached a point where it could no longer be hidden. Legends whispered that he had begun wearing a silver mask. Because his face was entirely consumed by sores, he could no longer walk or use his hands. Yet, in 1183, when news arrived that Saladin was besieging Kerak castle, Baldwin once again achieved the impossible. He had his immobile body strapped to a litter and went to war carried between two horses. At the head of his army, when Saladin saw that litter rising on the horizon and the banner of the masked king, he lifted the siege. This was the last great victory won not by physical strength, but by pure will. But every candle flickers one last time before it goes out. By the year 1185, Baldwin was completely bedridden. Every breath was becoming a greater agony. Even in his final moments, he thought of his kingdom. He appointed his nephew, young Baldwin, as his heir and tried to curb Guy de Lusignan's ambition for power. In March, as the spring winds of Jerusalem blew, the legendary 24-year-old king took his final breath. The city wept. Not only the Christians, but even his enemy Saladin bowed in respect at the death of such an honorable opponent. When Baldwin died, the invisible but iron will that held Jerusalem together vanished with him. The silence that fell upon Jerusalem after Baldwin's death was merely the harbinger of a great storm. As the king's body was carried to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, he left behind not just a kingdom, but a profound void. Baldwin's final wish was to preserve the unity of the realm. However, as soon as that iron will was buried beneath the earth, ambition and greed broke free from their chains. The tragic and premature death of his nephew, young Baldwin V, left the keys of the kingdom to the man Baldwin feared most, Guy de Lusignan. Instead of protecting Baldwin's legacy, Guy de Lusignan signed off on decisions that would lead the kingdom to ruin. Beside him was Raynald de Chatillon, a man who disregarded peace treaties and lured Saladin onto the battlefield by attacking Muslim caravans. The delicate balance that Baldwin had patiently built over years was shattered by Raynald's sword. Saladin had now sworn an oath: Jerusalem would either belong to Islam or seas of blood would flow for it. The year 1187 would go down in history as a year of catastrophe for the Christian world. At the hills known as the Horns of Hattin, while the Crusader army was parched with thirst and scorched by heat, they were surrounded by Saladin's forces. Lacking Baldwin's legendary military genius and strategic patience, Guy had marched his army straight into a trap. As the sun set, the finest knights of the Kingdom of Jerusalem were buried in the burning sands of Hattin. The true cross, which Baldwin had protected with his own hands, fell into the hands of the Muslims. When Saladin arrived at the gates of Jerusalem after his victory at Hattin, there was no masked king to stop him. Yet, Baldwin's shadow still lingered on the walls. The people resisted to protect the honor of their leper king. When the city finally fell, the mercy Saladin showed seemed like a reflection of the secret respect that had once existed between him and Baldwin. Baldwin died as a man who exalted his soul even as his body decayed. He was not just a king, but a symbol of humanity's ultimate resistance against fate. Even today, when the dusty winds of Jerusalem blow, the story of that young man looking at his kingdom from behind a mask continues to be told. For Baldwin was a possibility within the impossible, a monument of life on the brink of death. Baldwin's reign was sustained not only by the sword, but also by cleverly crafted diplomacy. Facing a genius like Saladin required not just physical strength, but nerves of steel and immense patience. Baldwin knew his time was running out due to his illness. Therefore, his relationship with Saladin resembled a deadly game of chess played by two grandmasters. In his letters to Baldwin, Saladin addressed him not merely as an enemy, but as a respected sovereign whose misfortune he sincerely pitied. When King Baldwin lost his sight to the disease, he began to rule his kingdom using only his ears. As spy reports were read to him, he could visualize every movement of his enemy in his mind. He could calculate the distance of Saladin's army to water sources, the direction of the wind, and the morale of the troops. Despite his blind eyes, Saladin realized that as long as Baldwin was alive, Jerusalem would never truly fall. This was one of the strangest rivalries in history. Two leaders wished to destroy each other, yet they held a profound admiration for each other's honor and resilience. During this period, Baldwin had entered a new stage in his struggle not just with the external enemy, but with his own body. Since he no longer had fingers, he could not press the royal seals or sign documents with his own hand. Yet his will was so dominant that even the most powerful barons of the court would gather round his bed, trembling as they took notes on the commands issued from the mouth of a blind man. Although he appeared as a living corpse, the true heart of Jerusalem still beat within his chest. In Baldwin's final days, the Kingdom of Jerusalem stood on the brink of an abyss. Even as the king struggled to breathe, he fought to prevent the chaos that would follow him. Seeing the incompetence of Guy de Lusignan, he removed him from power and granted the regency to Raymond of Tripoli. However, Baldwin knew that once he was gone, most of these decisions would be swept away in the storm of ambition. Even on his deathbed, Baldwin displayed the greatest virtue a king can possess: responsibility. Despite the horrific pain brought by his illness, he never rebelled against his fate for a single day. Historians write that even in his last moments, he encouraged those around him and reminded them of the sanctity of Jerusalem. When he died on that spring day in 1185, the kingdom lost not just a sovereign, but its protective spirit. Baldwin's grave was dug next to his father's in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Most of those who buried him knew that these lands would soon change hands. Yet, none would ever forget the superhuman will Baldwin had displayed. His story is proof that physical pain and an inevitable end cannot force a man to abandon his duty. Baldwin did not sink into the dusty pages of history merely as a leper king. Instead, he became a North Star, showing how light can shine even in the darkest moments. Even today, when people hear the name the Leper King, they do not think of a disease, but of an epic saga of impossible resistance. The story of Baldwin IV is not just the defense of a kingdom, but the epic tale of the human spirit's absolute triumph over biological decay. He was crowned as a child, lived as a warrior, and died with the dignity of a saint. While history has forgotten many rulers who were physically far stronger than him, it has etched the name of this masked youth, whose body withered day by day. In letters of gold, when the wind blows through the dusty streets of Jerusalem, one can almost still feel the piercing gaze from behind that silver mask. Baldwin taught us this: true power does not reside in the hand that holds the sword, but in the unwavering will that commands it. He was not only the king of Jerusalem, he was the king of his own destiny. When the lights fade and the curtains close, one singular image remains: a young man on a litter between two horses. Racked with pain, but standing proud at the head of his army, he was Baldwin IV, the Leper King of Jerusalem, with the purest heart of all. May his soul rest in peace, and his legacy live on forever. History remembers conquerors, but it never forgets legends. Subscribe to XL History, because the past is closer than you think.